It looked like an ordinary portrait, two sisters seated side by side, captured in soft Victorian light, framed in silver and dated 1897. For decades, the photograph remained hidden inside a writing desk, passed quietly through generations of the Ravenscroft family. When it resurfaced during a small estate auction in rural Massachusetts, no one suspected it held anything beyond sentimental value. The faces seemed peaceful, their posture perfect, their eyes steady, or so it appeared at first glance. But once a closer inspection began, something felt disturbingly wrong. Beneath the polished grace of the elder sister's expression lay another gaze that refused to conform. Her younger sister's eyes were different, strangely dilated, unfocused, almost hollow, as if she were staring at something invisible beyond the camera's reach. Experts who later examined the daguerreotype insisted the anomaly wasn't a trick of exposure or damage. The younger Ravenscroft girl's pupils were unnaturally wide, far beyond what natural light or a slow shutter could explain. Even more unsettling, her stillness seemed forced, her shoulders rigid, her fingers slightly blurred as though trembling at the moment the image was captured. What began as a simple preservation task quickly turned into an investigation spanning medical archives, lost journals, and a family's deliberate silence. In the weeks that followed, conservators, historians, and physicians pieced together fragments of a forgotten truth, one that merged science, grief, and moral secrecy. And through every discovery, those eyes remained, dark, fixed, and impossibly alive in their stillness. This is not the story of a haunted photograph. It is the story of what happens when medicine, morality, and memory collide behind a single image. Subscribe to Grave of the Shadows and share your thoughts in the comments, because some stories hide deeper than the darkness itself. The Ravenscroft portrait came to light purely by accident. In the spring of 2023, an antique dealer named Margaret Holloway was cataloging contents from the long-abandoned Ravenscroft estate near Ashfield, Massachusetts. Tucked within a false bottom of a mahogany writing desk, she discovered a small velvet case embossed with a silver monogram. Inside rested an exquisitely preserved daguerreotype, two young women seated in a parlor, dressed in heavy brocade, their hair arranged with exacting care. A handwritten note beneath the image read simply, "Eleanor and Clara, Autumn 1897. At first, the find was treated as a charming relic of Gilded Age domestic life. The estate's ledgers confirmed that Arthur Ravenscroft had been a textile industrialist of some regional prominence, known for his rigid propriety and philanthropy. His daughters, Eleanor and Clara, were fixtures of social events recorded in local newspapers until the late 1890s, when Clara's name abruptly disappeared from mention. Holloway, intrigued by the omission, contacted the Berkshire Historical Preservation Trust, which agreed to assess and digitize the artifact for archival storage. When the photograph arrived at the laboratory, conservator Dr. Helena Moore began the routine cleaning process: removal of oxidation from the glass plate, adjustment of lighting contrast, and digital scanning for catalog records. Yet under magnification, the familiar calm of Victorian portraiture fractured. Clara's gaze appeared disconcertingly wrong, pupils widened like pools of ink, the faintest tremor visible in her hands, the suggestion of tension beneath stillness. Dr. Moore noted the anomaly but hesitated to dismiss it as coincidence. Something about the younger sister's eyes unsettled her, an inexplicable impression that the camera had captured more than reflected light. What began as an archival task was about to become a meticulous investigation into a century-old secret buried in silver and glass. When Dr. Helena Moore examined the Ravenscroft portrait under controlled light, she expected nothing more than surface imperfections. Instead, what emerged beneath the microscope unsettled her deeply. Eleanor Ravenscroft, the elder sister seated on the left, displayed the serene composure typical of late Victorian portraiture. Hands folded, posture immaculate, eyes focused directly upon the lens. But Clara, positioned at her side, seemed locked in a trance. Her pupils were abnormally dilated, her expression distant yet faintly strained. Even in a static image, her presence conveyed a strange motionless tension, as though she were trying to remain still for reasons other than etiquette. Dr. Moore documented her findings carefully. The exposure length typical of 1,897 photographs demanded subjects remain still for several seconds, but Clara's facial rigidity went beyond discipline. Under infrared analysis, the younger sister's complexion appeared markedly paler than Eleanor's, with darker shadows beneath the eyes and faint blurring around the fingertips, suggesting involuntary tremor caught mid-pose. At first, Moore considered the possibility of a technical flaw, a reflection, overexposure, or chemical variance during the plate's development. Yet repeated tests confirmed consistency across the image. Her professional curiosity sharpened into unease. "This isn't deterioration," she wrote in her initial report. "The visual irregularities originate from the subject herself." That conclusion left her facing a more complicated question. What had caused them? Victorian photography often immortalized sickness, mourning, even death, but this picture carried none of those explicit signals. It looked alive, too alive in a way that defied comfort. Moore's instincts told her the answer would lie not in chemistry but in history. Within days she began requesting birth records, medical ledgers and parish archives connected to the Ravenscroft name, unaware that her inquiry was about to unravel a tragedy hidden behind a portrait's perfect symmetry. The Ravenscroft name appeared frequently in the archives of late 19th century Massachusetts. Factory ledgers, church registries and social bulletins painted the portrait of a family both respected and reserved. Arthur Ravenscroft, the patriarch, managed several textile mills. His wife, Margaret, presided over charitable societies and afternoon teas. Their elder daughter, Eleanor, attended recitals and parish events well into adulthood. The younger, Clara, appeared in local announcements until 1896, then vanished from record entirely. Driven by professional curiosity, Dr. Helena Moore traveled to the Berkshire Historical Preservation Trust, where she examined baptismal logs and medical directories. Census documents from 1900 confirmed the sisters' birth years, Eleanor in 1874, Clara in 1877, but Clara's column 4 occupation was left blank. Parish correspondence hinted that she had taken ill the previous winter, confined mostly to the family home. Nothing in those polite notes suggested scandal or misfortune, yet every line carried the deliberate vagueness of people avoiding a subject too delicate to name. A letter found in a parish file provided the first real clue. Dated February 1897, it referenced Dr. Samuel Hargreaves, a Boston physician known for treating nervous ailments among women of standing. The letter mentioned that the Ravenscrofts had consulted Dr. Hargreaves regarding the younger daughter's recurrent episodes. Moore recognized the medical euphemism immediately. In Victorian terminology, episodes often concealed conditions ranging from epilepsy to psychiatric disorders. She noted how precisely this timeline aligned with the portrait's date, September 1897, and Clara's disappearance from public view shortly thereafter. The alignment felt too exact to ignore. Moore's inquiry was no longer about artistic technique, it was about cause and consequence. Somewhere in those months between the doctor's consultation and the photographer's flash, something irreversible had changed within the Ravenscroft household. And it began with. The first real turning point came when Dr. Helena Moore consulted Dr. Miriam Clark, a neurologist specializing in 19th century medical history. Together they examined the digital scans of Clara Ravenscroft's image, adjusting light spectrums to isolate tonal irregularities invisible to the naked eye. What appeared merely unsettling under normal conditions became unmistakable when filtered through modern analysis. Clara's pupils were unnaturally enlarged, and her irises showed no distinct boundary, a visual effect consistent with prolonged chemical dilation. Dr. Clark's notes were clinical yet chilling. Such dilation, she observed, would be unsustainable during a lengthy photographic exposure unless induced by medication. Victorian physicians often prescribed mixtures of belladonna or opium-based tonics to calm seizures, neuralgia, or emotional disturbances labeled nervous disorders. Both substances could widen pupils dramatically, cause tremors, and produce a distant or vacant stare. Cross-referencing this medical context with the Ravenscroft archives, Moore discovered several pharmacy receipts addressed to Arthur Ravenscroft, dated early 1897. Each listed tinctures containing atropine and potassium bromide, common prescriptions for convulsive ailments. The realization formed slowly, like developing film in dark solution. Clara was not the victim of misfortune captured by chance. She was being treated, perhaps aggressively, for a chronic neurological condition. Further image analysis revealed another subtle detail, a faint blur along the line of Clara's wrist where her pulse would have throbbed during exposure. The distortion was consistent with a slight tremor. Moore understood now why the photographer's composition had placed Eleanor's hand gently over her sister's arm. Not affection alone, but stabilization. For the first time, the photograph's mystery began to shift from the supernatural to the scientific. Yet beneath that rational clarity lay something darker, the quiet cost of medicine in an age when cure and harm were often indistinguishable. Among the personal effects donated to the Berkshire archives, Dr. Helena Moore uncovered a packet of sun-bleached envelopes tied with silk ribbon and marked Private, ER. The letters, exchanged between Eleanor Ravenscroft and her aunt in Boston between 1895 and 1898, offered the first emotional window into the family's silence. In one letter dated January 1896, Eleanor wrote, "Clara's spells have grown more frequent. Father consults every specialist he can find, yet none agree on the nature of her condition. Mother rarely sleeps. The house feels suspended between hope and dread." The next year, another letter confessed, "Dr. Hargreaves's new tonic from Vienna steadies her limbs but leaves her strange, dreamy, detached, almost not herself. Father calls it improvement. I'm not sure." As Moore transcribed each page, she noted how language shifted from polite optimism to veiled despair. Social invitations were regrettably declined, Clara's piano lessons temporarily postponed, her presence at Sunday service inadvisable. The correspondence documented a family performing normalcy while illness hollowed its youngest member. One final note, dated October 1897, just weeks after the portrait sitting, struck hardest. The photographer was patient, though Clara trembled despite the medication. Father insisted we proceed. I held her arm so she might seem composed. When I looked at the plate, I saw not my sister but the shadow of what medicine has made her. Moore closed the brittle pages, realizing the photograph's haunting quality had been described a century earlier by the only witness who understood it. The letters transformed the image from an artistic curiosity into testimony, proof that the calm Victorian facade concealed a battle between treatment, reputation, and the fragile humanity trapped within both. Weeks later, Dr. Helena Moore located an overlooked reference in a medical index linking Dr. Samuel Hargreaves to the Harvard School of Medicine's private archives. Among his papers was a worn leather journal labeled Simply Selected Cases, 1894 to 1898. The entries were methodical, dates, dosages, and coldly precise observations. One particular patient, identified only as CR female 19, corresponded unmistakably to Clara Ravenscroft. Hargreaves's handwriting, slanted but disciplined, recounted the course of treatment. March 12, 1897. Implemented atropine bromide regimen following recurrent convulsive episodes. Symptoms subdued, yet patient exhibits pronounced mydriasis and altered effect. Another entry read, April 3, parental anxiety increasing. Father insists on visible improvement before social season resumes. Maintaining current dosage. By August, the notes darkened. Major seizures lessened but patient weakened. Heart irregularities observed. Complexion pale, speech slurred. The final entry, dated October 30, 1897, just days before Clara's death certificate would later record cardiac failure, was brutally concise. Prognosis poor. Medication necessary for neurological control exceeding safe threshold. Family advised to prepare. Moore read in silence. The matter-of-fact tone struck harder than any melodrama could. Hargreaves hadn't been cruel. He had been limited by his era's understanding. In attempting to quiet Clara's seizures, he had subdued her very vitality. Cross-referencing chemical analyses confirmed that the atropine bromide mixture used by Hargreaves caused severe dilation of pupils and cardiovascular stress. The unearthly look frozen in the photograph was no supernatural omen. It was physiology recorded by light and silver. For Moore, the revelation transformed the portrait once more. Not a mystery of ghosts, but a tragedy of medicine. A frozen moment where compassion and ignorance converged, leaving behind an image that neither science nor sentiment could ever fully repair. To understand Clara Ravenscroft's suffering, Dr. Helena Moore sought expert interpretation from Dr. Lucas Wynne, a historian of 19th-century neurology. In a quiet consultation room lined with anatomical charts, Wynne unfolded the broader story of medicine's uneasy evolution. The 1890s, he explained, were a period of optimism shadowed by ignorance. Physicians finally recognized that epilepsy and similar convulsive disorders arose from the nervous system, not demonic possession or moral weakness. Yet their treatments remained primitive, often more dangerous than the diseases themselves. Potassium bromide and belladonna derivatives were hailed as miracle tonics, but they depressed the body's vital functions and blurred consciousness. In moderate doses they calmed tremors. In excess, they induced what doctors politely called nervous quietude, a chemically enforced stillness. Patients like Clara, he said, were victims of this therapeutic paradox. Medicine that appeared to heal by making its subjects docile, compliant, and half-present. Dr. Wynne showed more reprinted advertisements from Boston apothecaries promising soothing elixirs for feminine exhaustion and remedies for hysteria. The same ingredients listed in those tonics, atropine, bromide, morphia, matched the receipts found in the Ravenscroft archives. In the cultural lens of the time, a subdued daughter was evidence of recovery, not alarm. The tragedy, when concluded, is that the very markers of decline, vacancy, pale complexion, the loss of spirit, were mistaken for success. To a Victorian eye, stillness was virtue. Moore realized then that the photograph's unsettling balance of composure and fragility was not accidental but emblematic of its century. The image captured not only one woman's illness but a whole era's misunderstanding of the human mind, when control was mistaken for cure and silence for serenity. Tracing the portrait's origins, Dr. Helena Moore discovered records from the Edward Harcourt Studio, a prominent photography establishment operating in Massachusetts from 1882 to 1910. Inside its surviving appointment ledgers, a brief entry stood out: September 18, 1897, Ravenscroft residence. Private commission. Special considerations noted. Attached to it were fragments of Harcourt's handwritten session notes, preserved on brittle onion skin paper. Unusual conditions, one line read. Younger subject appears heavily medicated, unresponsive to instruction. Father insists on completion. Elder sister provides stabilization. Another note added, attempted sidelight to soften ocular glare, but dilation too pronounced to disguise fully. Even through the restrained language of a tradesman, Harcourt's discomfort was evident. According to his later correspondence, letters Harcourt wrote to a fellow photographer in 1902, the Ravenscroft sitting had troubled his conscience. He described it as a scene of quiet tension, the elder sister whispering reassurance, the father standing nearby with arms folded, the mother weeping behind a doorway. The exposure lasted nearly a minute, during which Clara's head tilted fractionally, enough for Harcourt to fear the plate would blur. Yet when the image developed it was sharp, hauntingly so. He delivered the finished print but retained a duplicate for his personal portfolio, an uncommon act that suggested he understood its peculiarity. That copy, later found in his archives, bore a single annotation: stillness under strain. For Dr. Moore, these details reframed the portrait's creation as a moment of moral conflict. Harcourt, caught between professional duty and empathy, had tried to immortalize normalcy while knowing he was photographing suffering. The image's technical perfection became a quiet betrayal, an artist's attempt to preserve beauty when truth was too unbearable to confront. While combing through the Ravenscroft family's personal archive, Dr. Helena Moore came upon a faded leather-bound notebook belonging to Eleanor Ravenscroft. Inside were delicate sketches, pressed violets, and dated entries written in careful, looping script. The final pages, composed between September and November 1897, transformed the investigation from academic to intimate. September 18, 1897, Mr. Harcourt arrived at 10. Clara was pale but obedient after the morning dose. Mother begged father to postpone the sitting, yet he refused, saying the family must present unity. When the photographer positioned us upon the settee, Clara whispered, "Do I look alive?" I told her yes, though she frightened me. Her gaze was distant, her smile uncertain. I felt her pulse racing under my hand. October 2, 1897, the portrait has arrived. Father praises its dignity, but mother turned away in tears. Clara stared at it long, touching her own image as though trying to recall what it felt like to be seen. November 3, 1897, she is gone. The doctor said her heart simply failed. I do not believe it failed, rather, it was exhausted by all it was forced to bear. As Moore read the entries, the formal tone of Victorian restraint dissolved into naked sorrow. Eleanor's words conveyed neither superstition nor hysteria but quiet understanding. Her sister had been consumed by treatment masquerading as care. Closing the diary, Moore realized that every analysis, the chemistry, the medical data, the historical context, had led back to this. A single voice mourning the cost of control. The photograph's stillness was no accident of exposure. It was the stillness of a young woman standing on the narrow edge between consciousness and oblivion, held steady by a sister who refused to let go. After Clara Ravenscroft's death, the Ravenscroft household seemed to fold in upon itself. Estate records and newspaper notices from late 1897 reflected a sudden withdrawal from public life. Charity functions once hosted by Arthur Ravenscroft were quietly cancelled. The family's attendance at church became sporadic. Within months, servants were dismissed, and by the turn of the century the estate's great windows had been shuttered. Through correspondence preserved in the family solicitor's papers, Dr. Helena Moore learned that Arthur had personally ordered all later photographs of Clara destroyed. Only the 1897 portrait remained, displayed in his study behind a lockable glass panel. Visitors who remarked on the younger daughter's unusual appearance were told that she had been unwell that day. No one questioned further. Victorian decorum left little room for illness that unsettled the senses. Yet even suppression left traces. In one unsigned note, likely written by Eleanor years later, Moore read, "Father spoke of Clara only in the past perfect tense, as though remembering someone from an earlier century. He called her our angel, but angels are safely distant. They do not remind us of human frailty." By the time Arthur Ravenscroft died in 1915, his will included strict instructions. The family portrait was to remain in his study in perpetuity. For him, it was not just a likeness but an act of control, proof that order had prevailed over affliction, that the Ravenscroft image remained unsullied. Moore understood then that the photograph had served two opposing purposes. To Arthur it preserved dignity, to Eleanor it preserved truth. Between them lay the silence that defined countless families of the Victorian age, where suffering was hidden not out of cruelty, but from a desperate wish that composure might somehow rewrite reality. More than a century later, the Ravenscroft portrait re-emerged, its silvered surface unchanged yet its meaning transformed. When Dr. Helena Moore completed her report, she proposed that the image be displayed as the centerpiece of a new exhibition at the Berkshire Historical Museum titled Silent Remedies: Illness and Identity in the Victorian Age. The curators agreed. Under controlled lighting, the daguerreotype was mounted in a climate-sealed case. Beside it, a digital display showed excerpts from Eleanor's letters and Dr. Hargreaves's medical notes. Visitors entered expecting a tale of haunting but lingered instead over the human dimension, the intersection of science, shame, and compassion etched into those eyes. Some described the photograph as tragic, others as redemptive. Children pressed their faces to the glass, whispering about how real Clara looked. Elderly guests often walked away in tears. Moore stood quietly during the exhibition's opening, observing how the portrait drew people together in reverent silence. "We began with mystery," she told a journalist, "but we ended with understanding. The true haunting lies not in superstition, but in empathy delayed by history." She reflected on how the image had outlasted every attempt to hide it. The desk that once concealed it had become its vehicle of preservation. The same hands that locked it away had ensured its survival. Through accident or intent, Eleanor's wish had come true. The world could finally see her sister as she was, not as medicine or propriety dictated. Under the museum lights, the silver plate shimmered faintly, reflecting each viewer's face within its depth. The past and present merged in that fragile reflection, a reminder that behind every preserved image lies a heartbeat once silenced, and a story waiting to be seen anew. Today, the Ravenscroft portrait stands not as a relic of superstition, but as a mirror reflecting the fragile line between compassion and control. What began as a haunting curiosity has become a testimony, a quiet confession from an era that mistook stillness for serenity. In the younger sister's eyes, we no longer see fear or possession. We see the cost of misunderstanding, the echo of medicine before empathy, and the love of a sister who refused to look away even when the world demanded silence. Dr. Helena Moore's investigation closed the loop that time had tried to erase. The blurred fingers, the rigid posture, the unfocused gaze, each detail once dismissed as imperfection, now reads as a record of endurance. Every shadow on that silver plate tells of a family wrestling with grief, faith, and the boundaries of science. The Ravenscrofts could not speak openly of illness, yet through the camera's lens they confessed everything. When visitors stand before the portrait today, they often remark that Clara's gaze seems to follow them. But perhaps it isn't pursuit, it's remembrance. A reminder that truth, however hidden, eventually surfaces. That behind every composed face in history lies a heartbeat, fragile and fleeting, demanding to be understood. For Grave of the Shadows, stories like this remind us that darkness doesn't always dwell in ghosts or legends. It often lingers in the choices we inherit, the silences we preserve, and the histories we refuse to face. If you found this story compelling, subscribe to Grave of the Shadows for more true narratives buried beneath time and secrecy. Share your thoughts in the comments, because every voice that listens, questions, or remembers helps bring light to the forgotten corners of the past.